My own daughter looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. Imagine that, being exiled from the very place you built with your own hands. This is not just a story. This is a family betrayal so deep it turned into a revenge story people can't stop talking about. I had just finished a brutal week managing my properties in San Diego. 62 years old, all I wanted was peace. A 2-hour drive through the California mountains, the crisp air of Lake Tahoe, and 3 days of quiet by the water. That villa was supposed to be my sanctuary, the dream house my wife Margaret and I built tile by tile, window by window, when life was still whole. As I pulled into the driveway, I imagined pouring a glass of wine, sitting on the terrace, and feeling close to her memory again. But what I found waiting on that terrace changed everything forever. 2 figures stood there in white bathrobes, steam rising from their coffee mugs. At first I thought maybe squatter strangers who had wandered into the wrong place. But then the sun caught her dark hair and my stomach dropped. It was Emily, my only daughter, and standing behind her was her husband, Nathan. He shifted uncomfortably the moment he saw me, but Emily didn't flinch. She leaned against the railing like she owned the place, her face carved into something colder than I had ever seen before. Not even during her worst teenage years had she looked at me like that. "Dad," she called out, her voice slicing through the afternoon air. "You can't stay here." For a second, I thought I misheard. Could my own child really be telling me to leave? The deed had my name on it. I had spent 30 years building a construction business just to buy this retreat. Yet there she stood, claiming it like it was hers. Nathan muttered something I couldn't catch, but Emily silenced him with a wave of her hand. I tried reason. "Emily, this is my villa. I just wanted a weekend." Her eyes narrowed. "Get out, Dad. You're just in the way." Those words didn't just hurt, they hollowed me out. In the way, this was where Margaret and I had planned to grow old together. This was where I came to feel her presence after she passed. And now my daughter was standing on that same terrace, pushing me out like I was some unwanted stranger. This is where my Lake Tahoe story truly begins. It's not just about real estate or inheritance. It's about betrayal, about boundaries, and about a father who finally decides to fight back. Stay with me, because what started as heartbreak will turn into one of the most unforgettable revenge stories you'll ever hear. It had only been a few days since that humiliating afternoon at Lake Tahoe, when my own daughter told me I was not welcome in my own home. I thought maybe she had acted out of impulse, maybe she had spoken in frustration, and that sooner or later she would call to apologize. But when the phone finally rang, the voice on the other end carried no warmth, no regret, no hint of reconciliation. It was cold, businesslike, as if she were negotiating with a stranger. "Dad," Emily said flatly, "listen carefully. Nathan and I have decided. The villa now belongs to his parents." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "What are you talking about?" I asked, the words catching in my throat. She didn't hesitate. "George and Linda will live there from now on. It's their home. You are not allowed to go there anymore." Just like that, 30 years of work, sacrifice, and dreams swept aside with a single declaration. I tried to steady my voice, but my hands were trembling. "Emily, have you lost your mind? You can't just take my property," she snapped back with that new edge I was still struggling to recognize. "Actually, I can, and I am. You barely use it anyway, and Nathan's parents desperately need a proper house. It makes sense." Her tone was surgical, as if I were an obstacle to be cleared rather than a father to be respected. All the long years of building my construction company flashed before my eyes. The nights I slept on plywood floors at job sites, the endless permit battles, the deals I had fought tooth and nail to secure. Every brick of that villa had been earned with sacrifice, and now my daughter, the little girl who once curled up in my lap with bedtime stories, was dismissing it all with a shrug. The rage boiled up, surprising even me. "It's my villa," I shouted into the phone, my voice cracking with fury. "I worked 3 decades to buy that place," but she only laughed, a humorless, sharp sound that cut me deeper than any blade. "You're being ridiculous, Dad. Selfish. After everything we've done for you since Mom died." I almost dropped the phone. Everything they'd done for me. My mind raced through the years since Margaret passed. Who had paid for Emily's wedding? Who had covered her car loan, her student debt, the deposit for her apartment? Who had written check after check while swallowing grief just to see her smile again? Me, I had done it all. Yet now she stood there rewriting history, painting herself as the giver and me as the taker. I tried to remind her of the truth. Emily, I paid for your college, your wedding, your car. I've supported you in every way I could, but she cut me off with brutal precision. That's what fathers do. Besides, you're old and alone now. What do you even need with such a big villa? The words landed like hammer blows, each one smashing through what little hope I still held. Old and alone. That was how she saw me, not as the man who raised her, not as the father who stayed up nights worrying about her future, but as a burden, a useless relic hoarding property that she thought should be redistributed. I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white, fighting back a tide of sorrow that threatened to drown me. In that moment, something hardened inside my chest. For 3 years since Margaret's death, I had bent over backward to be patient, to excuse Emily's sharp words, her coldness, her growing sense of entitlement. I told myself it was grief that she was still processing her mother's absence. But now I could see the truth. This was not grief anymore. This was greed. This was betrayal. I spoke slowly, each word measured as if I were finally remembering who I was. Emily, those are Nathan's parents. They are strangers to me. They have no right to my villa. There was a pause on the line, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she had heard the finality in my tone. But then she hissed back. They're family now, and unlike you, they'll actually appreciate what they're getting. The cruelty was breathtaking. The little girl Margaret and I had raised with love was gone, replaced by a woman who saw her father only as a bank account, standing in the way of her plans. Silence hung heavy between us, broken only by the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Finally, I whispered the only word that mattered. No. It stunned her. I could hear the disbelief crackling over the line. What did you just say? She asked, and I repeated it louder this time, stronger. No, Emily. The answer is no. That single word marked the beginning of a war I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. This wasn't just an inheritance drama anymore. This was a father versus daughter conflict that would redefine everything between us. It was the moment betrayal crossed into open battle, and it was the moment I realized that sometimes the only way to protect love is to draw a line and say once and for all enough. A few days after that brutal phone call, my driveway filled with the sound of tires on gravel, and when I looked through the camera feed, I saw a dark minivan pull up like it already belonged there. Out stepped Nathan, my son-in-law, with that smug confidence he wore like a second skin, followed closely by his parents, George and Linda Carter. They carried suitcases, boxes, even a rolled-up rug, as if they were arriving not for a visit, but for a permanent relocation. Emily walked ahead of them, her voice bright, theatrical, like a hostess welcoming honored guests. She pointed toward the terrace, waving her hands in wide gestures. This is where you'll have your morning coffee. The sunlight is perfect here, she told Linda, who clutched her purse against her side and smiled like she had just won the lottery. George nodded approvingly, already scanning the property like a man inspecting his new kingdom. And then with a practiced softness, Linda turned to me through the camera microphone I had hidden. Thomas, this place is too beautiful for one man to enjoy alone. Don't you think it's better if it's filled with family? The word family tasted rotten coming from her lips. They acted with the tenderness of people trying to cloak a theft in affection. Linda touched the banister as though she was caressing a treasure passed down through generations, murmuring, "We'll take such good care of it. You'll always be welcome, of course." But I knew the script. Those words were not an invitation. They were a dismissal in disguise. George chimed in with paternal authority, saying, "At our age, it's harder to find stability. This villa is exactly what we need, and you've already had your time to enjoy it." I wanted to scream at the screen that they had done nothing to earn this house, that every tile, every stone had been paid for with my sweat, my labor, my sleepless nights. But instead I stayed silent, recording every word, watching the performance unfold like a cheap play. Emily leaned into Linda, smiling with exaggerated warmth, calling her mom, in a tone so sugary it made my teeth ache. She guided them through the kitchen, pointing out appliances as if she had bought them herself. "Look, Mom, the view from the sink is gorgeous. You'll love cooking here." Linda clasped her hands together in mock gratitude. "Oh, Emily, thank you, sweetheart. We can't believe you'd share this with us." Share it wasn't hers to share. Yet standing there, you would think Emily was the benefactor of some great inheritance, bestowing generosity upon the less fortunate. It was inheritance drama of the ugliest kind, fabricated affection to justify theft. George tried a different tactic, appealing to sympathy. You're a widower, Thomas. It must be so lonely up here by yourself. Imagine how lively it will feel with us living here, filling the rooms with laughter again. His voice was calm, reasonable, like a neighbor offering a solution, but the implication was razor sharp. Your loneliness is our opportunity. Nathan added the finishing touch, stepping forward with a carefully measured smile. We all want what's best for Emily, and she'll feel so much happier knowing her parents are safe and comfortable here. Isn't that what Margaret would have wanted? At the mention of my late wife's name, something inside me snapped. They dared to drag Margaret into this charade using her memory as a bargaining chip. As they sat around my dining table sipping the wine they had brought as if christening their new home, their laughter rang false. They asked questions about the heating system, the property taxes, the maintenance schedule, all under the guise of casual curiosity. But I knew exactly what it was: reconnaissance. Every soft-spoken compliment, every gentle touch on the furniture, every staged laugh was part of the performance. This wasn't family love, it was a con. It was family betrayal dressed up as kindness. Watching them, I realized the betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't only Emily pushing me aside. It was an entire network and alliance between daughter, husband, and in-laws united in their greed. They weren't here to comfort me. They were here to erase me. Their affection was a costume, their warmth a mask, and beneath it all was the cold, hard truth: they wanted what was mine, and they would smile sweetly while taking it. That was the night I swore their act would not fool me again. If they wanted to play family, I would show them what happens when a father stops playing the victim and starts playing for keeps. That night, after the Carters paraded through my villa as if it were already theirs, I sat alone in my San Diego study, staring at the framed photograph of Margaret that had never left my desk. The house was silent except for the low hum of traffic outside, but inside me there was a storm building. I traced the outline of her face with my eyes, remembering the way the Lake Tahoe sun had caught the silver in her hair during our last summer together. She was laughing at something simple, some silly joke I had made about how we should have bought a smaller property because I was too old to climb the stairs every day. That laugh had been light musical, the kind of sound that made the weight of the world seem trivial. And now, 3 years after she was gone, I realized I had been clinging to that memory as if it could protect me from the darkness pressing in. The villa was not just a house, it was the life we built together. Margaret and I had chosen every detail, from the rough pine beams in the living room ceiling to the stone tiles on the terrace. I still remembered how she insisted on a wide kitchen window so she could watch the lake while cooking, saying the view would make even burnt toast taste gourmet. We had poured not just money but love into that place, and since her death, every visit to the villa had been my way of staying close to her. It was sacred ground, a Lake Tahoe story written in woodstone and memory. For Emily to treat it like some disposable bargaining chip for her in-laws, it wasn't just theft, it was desecration. I closed my eyes and tried to hear Margaret's voice the way she used to calm me after long days at the construction sites. She would place a hand on my shoulder and whisper, "Be patient, Thomas. Emily's young. She's still learning." Those words had become my mantra after Margaret's death. Every time Emily snapped at me, every time she demanded money with little gratitude, I told myself to be patient. Every time she rolled her eyes at my advice or dismissed my grief as weakness, I convinced myself it was all part of her healing. For 3 years, I had mistaken patience for love. But sitting there in the dark, the truth finally broke through. This wasn't love anymore. This was surrender. And surrender had only taught Emily that betrayal carried no consequence. The memories cut deep. I thought about Emily at 5 years old, clutching my hand as she begged me not to leave for work. I thought about the nights I rocked her to sleep when she had fevers, the mornings I packed lunches, the afternoons I cheered from the bleachers at her soccer games. Every sacrifice I had made, every ounce of effort I had poured into being her father, had been built on the belief that one day she would carry forward the values Margaret and I had lived by. Instead, she had twisted my kindness into entitlement, my grief into leverage. This was family betrayal in its purest form, and I had let it grow by confusing love with weakness. I pressed my palms against my eyes, fighting tears that refused to stay buried. Margaret would never have tolerated this. She had always been the disciplinarian, the one who drew lines and held firm. She loved Emily, but she never allowed her to mistake affection for control. If Margaret had lived to see this day, she would have told me to stop excusing the inexcusable. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Thomas, enough." A father who never says no isn't kind, he's complicit. The realization stung, but it also cleared the fog. I understood now that my grief had been a cage. I had kept saying yes because I was terrified of losing the last family I had. But family that thrives on exploitation isn't family at all. It is manipulation, and it only ends one way, with the victim disappearing entirely. I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. I looked again at Margaret's picture, her eyes sparkling with life, her smile eternal. For the first time in years, I didn't feel just sadness. I felt resolve. This father versus daughter conflict had reached its breaking point, and the man who had built skyscrapers and battled city councils was finally awake again. I whispered into the quiet Margaret, "I won't let her erase us. I won't let her take what we built." And as the words left my lips, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The grieving widower was gone. In his place was a man ready to fight. The morning after I admitted to myself that patience had become surrender, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief that had once clouded every decision was gone, replaced by something sharper, colder strategy. In my construction career, I had survived cutthroat negotiations, ruthless competitors, and legal battles that dragged on for months. I had always prevailed because I understood one thing: information is power and preparation is victory. If Emily wanted a war over my villa, then I would fight it on two fronts: the courtroom and the battlefield of technology. I drove downtown to the office of David Wong, the attorney who had handled my contracts for over a decade. His office overlooked the San Diego harbor sailboats dotting the blue water beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. He rose from his desk the moment I entered, his handshake firm, his eyes sharp behind thin glasses. "Thomas, it's good to see you. What can I help you with today?" I took my seat, leaned forward, and said the words that shifted our relationship from business as usual into something far more personal. "David, I need to protect my villa. My daughter is trying to take it from me." His expression tightened, but he didn't look surprised. He had seen enough inheritance drama to know how ugly family betrayal could get. We spent an hour reviewing the deed transfer documents and every scrap of paper tied to the property. David scribbled notes on his legal pad, his pen moving with the precision of a surgeon. "Your ownership is airtight," he assured me. "But if they attempt coercion, we'll need to document everything: calls, texts, threats. Keep a record of it all. It may not just protect you legally, it may save you in court if they try to challenge your mental competence or accuse you of harassment." His tone carried the weight of experience. I promised him I would keep meticulous files. Before I left, he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Thomas, don't underestimate them. When family believes they're entitled, they can become more ruthless than any stranger." Leaving David's office, I felt fortified but restless. Legal protection would hold them at bay in the long run, but I needed something immediate. I needed a way to show Emily and the Carters that I wasn't just going to roll over anymore. That's when I remembered my neighbor Ethan Miller, a software engineer with more gadgets in his house than most tech stores. Last winter, I had helped him when his basement flooded, and he had promised me a favor in return. Now I intended to cash it in. When I knocked on his door, he opened it in jeans and a faded t-shirt with some Silicon Valley startup logo. His home office was a jungle of monitors, wires, and blinking devices. "Thomas, what's going on?" he asked, ushering me in. I sat down, took a deep breath, and said, "I need your help setting up something unusual. Think of it like a haunted house, but smarter." His eyes lit up instantly. "Smart home revenge," he grinned. "I'm listening." I explained how my daughter and her in-laws were planning to move into my villa against my will. I wanted the house itself to reject them, to terrify them into leaving without ever laying a hand on them. Ethan practically bounced in his chair as I described the idea. He started sketching diagrams, motion sensors to trigger strobing lights, hidden speakers to project chilling voices, faucets that would roar to life as if the house itself were alive. "We can even add projections," he said, already pulling a compact projector from a box. Shadows moving across walls, figures in the hallway. The human brain fills in the blanks. It'll scare them worse than anything real. I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in weeks, I felt not just grief or anger, but a spark of excitement. This was more than defense. This was strategy. This was payback. This was the beginning of my revenge story. By the time we drove up to Lake Tahoe with Ethan's SUV packed full of equipment, the plan had crystallized. We mounted sensors in the entryway, hid speakers behind bookshelves, set up cameras in every room. Ethan programmed the system so that each trigger would escalate. The longer the intruder stayed, the more terrifying the house would become. And to make it airtight, we installed a professionally printed sign on the front door, "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." That single line made the whole setup legally defensible. As the sun set behind the lake, I stood in the villa I had built with Margaret, now wired with technology, ready to defend itself. For years, I had allowed my love for Emily to blind me, but now I saw clearly. If she wanted to treat me like an obstacle, then I would become the immovable wall. If she wanted war, then she was about to discover that her father was no victim, he was a strategist. Sunday evening arrived with the precision of a countdown clock, and I sat in my San Diego study with 3 monitors glowing in front of me, each showing a different angle of my villa. The lake shimmered in the twilight, pine trees swayed in the breeze, and the house looked as peaceful as it always had. But beneath that surface, the villa had been transformed into a fortress of illusions. The sensors were armed, the speakers were silent but ready, the projectors calibrated to paint shadows across walls, and the water system primed to roar like a flood. Everything was waiting for one command mine. At exactly 8:30 p.m., headlights appeared on the driveway camera. The Carter family minivan pulled in with casual arrogance, as if the ground already belonged to them. Emily stepped out first, her hair catching the last light of day, her posture full of triumph. Nathan followed, carrying a box under one arm, while George and Linda shuffled behind with suitcases. They were laughing, pointing at the terrace, already imagining it as theirs. Emily raised her hand in a mock toast toward the villa and said something I could hear clearly through the microphones, "Home sweet home." My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to wait. They crossed the threshold, ignoring the warning sign that Ethan and I had placed on the front door. Linda even scoffed, tearing it off the wall and tossing it aside. "What nonsense," she muttered. Fair warning had been given, and now the game would begin. They unpacked in the living room, making themselves comfortable, completely unaware that every movement was being recorded and every word captured. I waited until the clock struck 10. My finger hovered over the tablet, and then I pressed execute. Instantly, the villa came alive. Lights exploded into strobing flashes of red, blue, and white, bouncing off the walls in dizzying patterns. Every faucet in the house burst to life, water gushing and echoing like a storm had broken indoors. Hidden speakers roared to life with a mechanical voice. "Unauthorized intrusion detected. This property belongs to Thomas Grayson. Leave immediately." The effect was instantaneous. Emily shrieked, stumbling backward as the lights blinded her. Nathan spun in circles, shouting, "Where's the breaker box?" Linda screamed for George, who clutched his chest and looked ready to collapse. Projectors cast ghostly figures across the hallways, shadows that moved like living things, arms reaching heads, turning shapes that vanished when looked at directly. It was chaos orchestrated with surgical precision. Through my monitors, I watched them scatter, running from room to room, trying to escape the storm of technology. The more they moved, the worse it became, motion sensors escalating every sequence, voices layering into terrifying warnings. "Leave this house. You are trespassing. Authorities have been notified." Water sprayed from showers and sinks, soaking the carpets. Strobe lights pulsed faster, disorienting them. Whisper effects slithered through the speakers, making it sound as if unseen people were muttering just behind their ears. Emily clutched her head, shouting, "This is impossible. Houses don't do this." Nathan finally found the electrical panel and yanked it open, but Ethan's backup system kept the entire fortress alive. His curses filled the air as he realized nothing could stop it. Linda sobbed, begging George to get her out, while George stumbled toward the front door, only to find the locks temporarily engaged. The 30-second delay we had programmed created the perfect illusion of being trapped, and I could see raw terror in their eyes. They pounded the door, screaming, until the lock clicked open again, and they burst out onto the terrace, gasping for breath. But the moment they stepped back inside, the nightmare resumed with double intensity. By dawn, the Carters were wrecks. Emily's voice was hoarse from screaming, Nathan's face pale with exhaustion, Linda's eyes red and swollen, George slumped in a chair, muttering prayers under his breath. At 6:00 a.m., I watched through the driveway camera as flashing lights appeared police cars. Emily must have called them in desperation. 2 officers walked the perimeter, entered cautiously, and spent 30 minutes inspecting the villa. They found strobing lights running faucets, automated locks, motion sensors, speakers, projectors, but nothing illegal. Just a highly advanced smart home system behaving exactly as programmed. One officer even chuckled, telling them, "Looks like a malfunction. Maybe you should call a technician." I nearly laughed out loud in my study. When the police left, the Carters were left with nothing but fear and humiliation. They had expected to claim my home with arrogance, but instead they had been driven to madness by the very walls they thought they owned. As I watched them drag their belongings back to the minivan, their faces hollow, I leaned back in my chair and whispered to Margaret's photo, they wanted a family betrayal. Now they know what a father versus daughter war really looks like. This was more than just inheritance drama. This was smart home revenge at its finest, and it had only just begun. By Tuesday morning, I had expected silence from Emily and Nathan, but instead my camera feed lit up again. A rental truck pulled into the driveway, and out stepped Nathan with another man carrying a toolbox, a locksmith. I watched from San Diego as Nathan gestured furiously toward the front door, his face tight with determination. The locksmith examined the locks, tapping at the smart keypad, fiddling with the panel Ethan had installed. I turned up the audio and caught his words. "These aren't normal locks, sir. They're part of an integrated system, biometric wireless with backup power. Replacing them isn't possible without dismantling the entire network." Nathan's jaw tightened, his voice dripping with frustration. "Just get it open." But the locksmith shook his head clearly, eager to leave. "Not without a full reprogramming. This is way out of my scope." 30 minutes later, the truck pulled away, leaving Nathan pacing angrily in front of a door he would never open. Their arrogance had collided with technology they could never defeat. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message, "We're coming over. We need to talk." I didn't respond. At exactly 8:00 p.m., headlights swept across my driveway, and I saw Emily and Nathan storming toward my front door in San Diego. When I opened it, Emily shoved past me, her eyes blazing, Nathan looming behind her with clenched fists. "Enough," she shouted. "This has gone too far." I closed the door calmly and leaned against it, meeting her fury with silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt in control. "You turned that house into a torture chamber." Emily spat, her voice shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what you put us through? Mom would be ashamed of you." My stomach twisted at the mention of Margaret, but I refused to flinch. "What would Mom think of you?" I asked quietly. "Stealing from your own father, handing our memories over to strangers, erasing everything she and I built. Don't you dare drag her name into this." The color drained from Emily's face, but she pressed on her tone, turning sharp. "You'll never see any grandchildren. When I have kids, they'll grow up without you. You'll die alone." 3 years ago, those words would have destroyed me. I would have begged, apologized, promised anything to keep her in my life. But that man no longer existed. I straightened my shoulders and replied, "Is that supposed to be a threat or a promise?" The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Nathan stepped forward, trying to intimidate me with his size. "We'll take you to court. We'll sue you for harassment, for emotional distress, for everything. You think you're clever, but you can't get away with this." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes only when you know the battlefield's already yours. Based on what evidence? That you had a bad night in a house you don't own, that you ignored a posted warning and trespassed? Good luck. Emily's hands trembled as she pointed at me, her words breaking into a near hysterical pitch. "We'll ruin you. We'll turn everyone against you. We'll make sure you regret this." Nathan nodded, his voice colder. "We have friends' connections. You can't stand against us." I studied them both, feeling nothing but a detached clarity. They had exhausted every weapon, guilt, intimidation, threats, and none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in 3 years, I realized I was untouchable. Finally, Emily's fury cracked into desperation. She stepped closer, her face twisted with malice. "We're just getting started. You have no idea what we're capable of." But I did. I had seen their best attempt, and it had collapsed in the face of one simple truth: I was no longer afraid. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. Nathan looked away. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps, and for the first time they seemed smaller, weaker. They turned toward the door, Emily throwing one last warning over her shoulder. "This isn't over." I let them leave, watching their car disappear into the night, and whispered to myself, "Actually, it is." The consequences of their betrayal were now permanent. The locks they couldn't break, the courtroom, they couldn't win the father they could no longer manipulate, those were the walls closing in around them. They thought they were fighting for property, but the truth was bigger. They had lost the war for control, and I had reclaimed my dignity. This father versus daughter revenge story was no longer about a house. It was about survival, and only one of us had survived intact. Wednesday morning came, and with it the moment I had been preparing for since the first time Emily tried to push me out of my own home. I walked into the conference room of Bradley Walsh, my notary, for more than 15 years, carrying a folder of documents that represented the final blow in this father versus daughter war. The polished oak table gleamed beneath the overhead lights, and the quiet tick of the wall clock sounded like a judge calling order in a courtroom. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door swung open and Emily walked in. Nathan close behind, followed by George and Linda Carter. They wore the kind of smug confidence I had seen on contractors who thought they'd won before the first bid had even been opened. Emily dropped into the chair across from me, her chin high, her eyes daring me to resist. "All right, Dad," she said, her voice sharp. "We're here to resolve this villa situation once and for all." I let Bradley open the folder, his calm, professional demeanor, the perfect counter to their arrogance. He cleared his throat. "Before we begin, you should all know that Mr. Grayson no longer owns the Lake Tahoe villa." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emily blinked, her smile faltering. Nathan's jaw tightened. Linda gasped. George frowned, confusion written across his face. "What do you mean?" Emily demanded, leaning forward, her voice rising. Bradley adjusted his glasses and continued with steady authority. "The property has been legally transferred to the Second Chance Foundation for Homeless Assistance. The deed was signed and recorded Monday morning. The transfer is complete and irrevocable." The silence that followed was almost sweet. Emily's lips parted, her face turning pale as the realization hit. "That's impossible. You had no right," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. I met her gaze calmly. I had every right. It was mine to give, and now it belongs to a cause that will actually appreciate it. Nathan sputtered, trying to salvage ground. "But we had an agreement. Emily said the villa was ours." Bradley's voice cut through like a scalpel. "Mr. Grayson can only transfer property he owns. As of Monday, he no longer owns it. You have no claim." Linda's voice wavered, fragile as glass. "But where will we live? We sold our lease. We counted on this." Her words trailed off into tears as George shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. I looked at them without malice, but with finality. "You'll have to make other arrangements, just as you expected me to do when you tried to push me out." Emily's eyes narrowed, her anger flaring again. "This is spite, pure revenge." I shook my head slowly. "No, this is justice, and it's permanent." For the first time, Nathan looked broken. His shoulders sagged, his face drained of color. "Our plans, our future, all gone," he muttered. Emily turned on me, desperation creeping into her voice. "When did you do this?" I let the silence stretch before answering. "Monday morning, right after your little experience at the villa." The timing landed like a hammer. Everything they had screamed at me during our confrontation, every threat, every cruel word, it had all been meaningless, because the house was no longer theirs to fight over. Emily sank back in her chair, trembling with rage and disbelief. Bradley laid out the final document, his tone clinical. "The transfer includes a lifetime usage clause. Mr. Grayson retains full access to the property until his death, but ownership is vested in the foundation. There is no legal path for reversal." Emily's voice cracked like breaking glass. "So you still get to use it. Nothing changes for you." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. "Everything changes. You no longer have any claim to it, ever. They sat in silence, broken, defeated, their family betrayal, collapsing under the weight of a simple signature. George and Linda whispered to each other, their faces hollow. Nathan stared at the table as though hoping it might open and swallow him whole. Emily's eyes burned with hatred, but behind it I saw the truth. She knew it was over. When they finally rose to leave, their footsteps echoed with the sound of dreams dying. As the door closed behind them, Bradley turned to me with a small nod. Masterful, Thomas. Absolutely masterful. I gathered the documents, my hands steady my chest, lighter than it had been in years. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt reconciled not with my daughter, but with myself. This was more than an inheritance drama. This was a revenge story about reclaiming dignity, about ending manipulation, about saying no when it mattered most. And as I walked out into the California sunlight, I knew the battle was over, and I had won. When the dust finally settled, I drove north again, the familiar winding roads leading me back to Lake Tahoe. The mountains rose on either side steady and unshaken, and the lake glimmered in the morning sun as if nothing had ever disturbed its calm. For years I had driven this route, burdened with grief, clinging to memories of Margaret, desperate for Emily's approval. But this time felt different. For the first time, I wasn't chasing peace, I was carrying it with me. Unlocking the door to the villa, I felt no fear of finding strangers on the terrace. No anxiety about being told to leave. The house greeted me with silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but whole. I walked through each room, slowly touching the beams, the stone, the window frames Margaret had chosen, and it felt as though I was reclaiming not just a house, but myself. I carried a mug of coffee out to the terrace, where Margaret and I had spent countless mornings, and I let the view wash over me. The air was crisp, the water still, and for the first time since her passing, I didn't feel like a victim clinging to what remained. I felt like a man who had finally drawn a line and said enough. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's surrender. And surrender doesn't heal families, it destroys them. I realized then that love does not mean allowing yourself to be erased. Love must be rooted in dignity. Family betrayal had tried to strip me of everything I had built, but by standing firm, I had found something more valuable than property. I had found myself again. If you've ever felt taken for granted, if you've ever mistaken patience for love, I want you to hear this clearly. Protecting yourself is not cruelty, it's survival. The moment you understand that truth, you reclaim not only your life, but your peace. And now to you watching, tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where setting boundaries saved you? Share your story because others need to hear it. If this tale of father versus daughter of inheritance drama turned into a revenge story, struck a chord with you, don't just scroll away. Save this video for the day you need strength. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden battles behind closed doors, and hit the like button so this message reaches someone else who needs it tonight. Because at the end of the day, the lesson is simple. True peace begins the moment you decide your worth is not negotiable.